Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, March 26, 2021. The wealthy may soon decide that it's time to support the fair tax. The fair tax has always been a remarkable thing, but now, nearly 30 years after its creation, our appreciation for just how remarkable it is continues to grow. The fair tax came into being when a group of wealthy businessmen in Houston came together, enlisted some of their other wealthy friends, and commissioned a group of accomplished economists to design a tax system that was as close to perfect as they could make it. The result came to be known as the fair tax, and Americans for Fair Taxation was born. Now, the men behind the fair tax often commented that enacting their creation would increase their own personal federal tax bills significantly. So, why did they support it? Well, because they knew it was the best thing for their children, their grandchildren, the country, and its citizens. Now, like other wealthy people, AFFT's founders were not afraid of the IRS. They could afford to hire the best tax professionals to assist them with their income tax planning, pay these same professionals to negotiate with the IRS and even go to court to fight an adverse IRS decision, and then if they ultimately lost, they could afford to pay the unpaid taxes, interest, and penalties. Now, one of these men told me that IRS agents were in his company every day conducting an income tax audit on him and his companies. He smiled when he related how he put them in a small windowless room where the air conditioning, now this was Houston, remember, the air conditioning only cooled the room down to the low 80s in the summer and heated it to the low 60s in the winter. When the agents complained, he'd always send in somebody to investigate, but somehow they just never could find the cause of the cooling or heating problem. Now, many people wonder why there's not more support for the fair tax among America's wealthiest taxpayers. The wealthy benefit greatly from strong economic growth, and they can surely see that economic growth under the fair tax would far surpass anything that could be achieved under the income tax. Now, the reason that there's not more support for the fair tax at the upper end of the economic scale is that many of America's super rich have arranged their affairs in such a way that they pay far less in income taxes than they might pay under the fair tax. However, two recent studies will lend support to the stated belief in D.C. that the wealthy are not paying their fair share of federal income taxes. A report released on March 18, 2020 by Syracuse University's Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse gives one explanation. That report found that the number of IRS revenue agents who are skilled enough to perform audits of complex tax returns is down 43% from 2010. The number of millionaires has nearly doubled since fiscal year 2012. In 2020, the IRS audited 11,331 taxpayers who reported over $1 million in income. Now that's down 72% from the 40,965 such returns that were audited in 2012. In 2020, fewer than 2 out of every 100 taxpayers reporting over $1 million in income were audited. In 2012, audits of millionaires turned up $4.8 billion in unreported taxes. But now, with the number of audits two-thirds lower, the government uncovered only $1.2 billion in unreported taxes in fiscal year 2020. Now, nearly 2 out of every 3 of the 755 largest corporations in the country, we're talking about those with over $20 billion in assets, they were not audited last year. Now, as recently as 2012, nearly all such returns, 93% to be exact, were being examined by the IRS. In 2012, audits of these corporate giants turned up $10 billion in unreported taxes, but only $4.1 billion was found in 2020. For corporations reporting over $250 million in assets, 2012 audits turned up $24.4 billion in unreported taxes, but that fell to just $5.4 billion in 2020. Taxpayers convicted as a result of IRS criminal investigations reached an all-time low in 2020, just 533 out of the hundreds of millions of taxpayers in this country. and just 255 of these convictions were for tax fraud or other Internal Revenue Code violations. Another report issued by the National Bureau of Economic Research on March 21, 2020, studied tax evasion by the top 1% of taxpayers. That report concluded that specifically, random audits do not capture most tax evasion through offshore accounts and pass-through businesses. The top 1% adopt a technology that conceals evasion, and unreported income as a fraction of true income rises from 7% in the bottom 50% to more than 20% in the top 1%, of which 6 percentage points correspond to undetected, sophisticated evasion. In conclusion, the two reports cited above are being used in D.C. to justify adding more revenue agents who will audit the top 1% more thoroughly and collect more tax dollars. Now, many members of Congress and many bureaucrats, too, believe that the only way to become wealthy is to do something illegal. So, these new agents will be under tremendous pressure to collect the evaded amounts. Now, unfortunately, the bureaucrats will insist that the IRS go after the entire top 1%, not just the ones who are actually evading their taxes. Now, in cases where agents can't find any evidence of evasion, they will likely just arbitrarily allege some kind of income tax deficiency and then seek to levy interest and penalties on that deficiency. Now, more and more, the top 1% of taxpayers will be hit with delinquent tax assessments that are not based on facts in the law, but instead are rooted in the political pressure being put on the IRS. The top 1% will soon discover something that the rest of us have known for a long time. Being subject to the federal income tax is a problem because the IRS doesn't have to prove anything. They can just arbitrarily make assessments that are very expensive to fight. It's time they recall the words of Martin Niemöller, the World War I German submarine commander who went to a seminary, became a prominent minister, and was ultimately sent to a Nazi concentration camp where he died. Reverend Niemöller said, "First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out then because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. They are now coming for the top 1% of taxpayers." As Abraham Lincoln once said, "The best way to get rid of a bad law is to enforce it strictly." The federal income payroll tax is a bad law, and a lot more people are about to discover that they do indeed have a dog in that fight. The solution? Enact the FAIRtax. By eliminating the income tax, the FAIRtax eliminates the IRS and the abuses that come with it. With the FAIRtax, you pay your federal taxes at the cash register when you make retail purchases of new goods and services. No tax returns, no audits. Now, if you have friends who don't know about the FAIRtax, send them to fairtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your member of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the FAIRtax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.